Hello, hello. Okay. Just mic checking. All right, we are back with the Big Share Live. Thank you all so much for joining us back here. We have been doing an amazing, can we just give a round of applause right now for all of our member groups? This has been an overwhelming day already, just hearing about the work of our member groups, seeing all the dollars raised, even before noon hour. So I am just here to announce Power Hour winners and introduce this amazing panel that we have next to me. So our Power Hour winners from the 10 to 11 o'clock hour, Wisconsin Literacy for most raised. Let's give a round of applause for Wisconsin Literacy. And Chrysalis with the most individual donors. Congrats, y'all. So our next panel is a panel on answering the question, how are we supporting LGBTQ plus youth in schools and beyond, from middle school to early childhood? Our panelists are Tyrone Creech Jr., Katie Rickard from GSAFE, and Jean Mua from Freedom, Inc.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us today. So we're going to just start by introducing ourselves, sharing our name, title, where we work, and a little bit about how we got involved in our work. Jean, do you want to start?
Hi, everyone. Ooh, my name is Jean Mua. My pronouns are she, her, her, or nu, and I am the Queer Justice Director at Freedom, Inc. right now. I actually got involved in the work as a young person. So I came through Freedom Inc. as a young person and am living proof and testament on what it means when you actually truly invest in your community and the things that are possible when you pour resources and time and love into them. Yeah, so that's how I got involved in the work, and I stayed because I just felt heard and seen, and I felt like I could turn all the anger that I had as a young person and make something very productive and beautiful about it, right? Because I think a lot of times we tell young people, why are you angry? Like, you need to step back, right? There's nothing we can do, but instead I was loved, and I was told, like, hey, we can actually do something. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tyrone. I'm with GSAFE. I am currently the Associate Director of DEI. I've been with GSAFE since 2015. I got started by doing the LTI camp that we do every summer, and I now run that camp. I was asked to be an adult mentor, and once I did it, I completely fell in love with it. I found my passion, my calling for working with LGBTQ high school youth, and also realized that the representation lacks very much in Wisconsin, let alone Madison itself. So it just became my calling, my passion, and I've been doing it ever since.
My name is Katie Rickard. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Associate Director for Youth Leadership and Advocacy at GSAFE. And I got involved, so I'm a classroom teacher by trade. I worked for the Madison School District. I worked both as a classroom teacher and in an administrative position doing some LGBTQ work for the whole district. And I was also a GSA advisor, and doing that work kind of helped me realize that I was really drawn to just really like social justice centered work. And being a teacher, I was pulled in a lot of different directions. I didn't always get to focus all of my energy on that. But I did do a lot of partnering with GSAFE in my programming. And so I eventually shifted over to that position. And it's been really amazing to, like TJ said, be able to be representative for youth, create opportunities for youth, some that I didn't even have when I was growing up. And just be able to travel the state of Wisconsin and really learn about some of the needs that we have both in rural areas and urban areas around the state. So we're going to move into talking a little bit about the specific populations that we work with and some of the needs that we see coming up in our community, and the work that our organization does to sort of support some of those challenges. Does anyone want to start?
Sure, I'll start. So I work with high school youth predominantly. We go to visit GSAs, we do youth programming. We did have a class called FWell that we taught every Monday that was at the Memorial Union for students around the different schools around the state of Wisconsin, well, in Madison. And we try to provide resources and community for our students. These are students that are LGBTQ, BIPOC, queer identifying, and they go to schools where they're not accepted and treated how they should be, and also their education is weaponized against them. So when we create these spaces, it brings them together, like one big GSA. They get to be with like-minded students. They get to talk about social justice issues that they don't get to talk about in school. They get to learn about sex ed. They get to learn about restorative justice. They get to learn about consent culture while having open discussions about these things and sharing opinions with other, again, like-minded students. It lets them feel seen, heard, valued, and know that it's also nice for them to see grown queer adults in professional settings, and lets them know that oh, there is something outside of high school and the terribleness that they're going through. So.
Yeah, I feel like we also try to provide some spaces where students can sort of channel leadership skills. So we often talk to, the educators that we work with, and we say, who are the kids that are speaking out a lot in class or seem to be off task or need a little bit more of a challenge? And those are the kids that we really try to pinpoint and find in the community and be involved in our work at GSAFE, because those are skills of an activist and an advocate and a leader. And especially for students of color, we really try to create spaces, because we know we're here in Wisconsin, and the unfortunate reality is that we mostly have white educators, white support staff, and we still serve a lot of students of color. And so GSAFE really works to create spaces where students of color feel heard and feel supported in what they're trying to do in their communities. And when we say youth specifically for GSAFE, we're talking about K-12 youth. And we primarily work with kids that are in public schools around Wisconsin, but we really support all students. And we also work to support educators, because we know that's kind of indirect support to students. So we provide a lot of educator training as well, go around and talk to school-based staff about what it looks like to create gender support plans and use the correct name and pronouns that kids want to be called and referred to as. And we also talk about looking at their school's policies and how do their policies feel supportive of LGBTQ youth and students of color, because we know that sometimes schools get used to what they have and they keep it the same year to year to year, and we know that times are changing and kids need to be represented, and sometimes that means looking at things like yearbooks or permission slips or all of these different things that are inclusive of their identities and their families' identities as well. Yeah, and I think that representation, like TJ said, is lacking. And so we do our best to make sure that kids know that there are queer folks of color who are out there living joyful lives, try to give them opportunities to experience community, see representation, and know that they can go on to be successful, be leaders, get married, have children, have joyful lives like that. So.
Yes, no, I totally agree around the representation is so key. And representation and actually loving affirming spaces. So at Freedom Inc., we specifically work with the Black and Southeast Asian community. And when just a little definition on Southeast Asian, what we mean by that is that we are specifically not talking about geographically Southeast Asian folks, but politically. It is a political identity. Southeast Asians are folks who were impacted by the American War, or as most folks in the US know as the Vietnam War. And we do this because it informs the way that we moved through the world and why we end up in the US, and what are the things that we need to do to make sure that our folks are not just surviving, but that they're thriving. So one thing I do want to say is that with a lot of the people that we work with, they're experiencing multiple things at once, right? They exist in the intersections of being LGBTQ, of being poor, of being a young person, their gender, right? All these things are true. And so when they're coming to us, a lot of times what we're noticing is that they're coming to us for one specific ask, but when we actually listen to them, there's so many more things they need, right? So they may come to us and be like, hey, at school today, the teacher went off at me, right? Because I didn't bring in my work, or I came in late, or I didn't want to, put my head up because I have a headache. And then as we're listening, we're finding out, you're actually experiencing houselessness, right? Oh, you're actually experiencing intimate partner violence. oh, you just got like fired from your job and it was due to X, Y, and Z, right? It was actually discrimination. So we're working with them and really approaching it as a holistic approach, right? And saying like, hey, you don't actually have to pick and choose between whether you're gonna do good in school or whether you have a place to sleep. You don't have to choose between whether you get to eat tonight or you get to like hang out with your friends, right? So we're really saying like, you don't get to choose, because a lot of times when folks are coming to us, they feel like they have to choose. And a lot of times when they come to us, we're their last resort. That they've tried many, many organizations, but because they had to choose between being Black, Southeast Asian, being queer and trans, right, that they felt like they could not get their needs met. So we're really approaching it as a holistic and seeing their whole being and saying, hey, you don't get to choose. You get to come here and show up as your full authentic self, and we're gonna work from there, right? And really looking at it as like long-term goals. So a lot of the things we do is we provide radical direct services, right? So whether that's people experiencing violence from school, at home, right, or in the justice system. And then we also support them with also leadership development, because it is important that we're providing them the space, the tools and resources to create these change in the world that they want to be in, so that they can live beyond, right, and have a safe space beyond just us, beyond just our door, because queer and trans people deserve to be in public spaces without experiencing violence.
Yeah. So I just was going to touch too a little bit on some of our work with families, specifically at GSAFE. So GSAFE also works to support families that are kind of on different journeys related to navigating identity together, navigating their child's identity, coming out. And so I think that it's helpful for us in our work to understand that youth also need spaces to create chosen families together. And so GSAFE, we do a lot of programming where students can experience coming together from different walks of life, different backgrounds, learning about identities that are different than theirs, and finding connections with folks. And we do that at the same time that we're also working with families who might be navigating a lot of different things. And so we like to, make sure that we know that families' ultimate goals are hopefully to support their child. Every parent wants to see their child happy and, living a good life. And sometimes that looks different for a lot of different families. And so we work with families who, are on board and are willing to, advocate alongside us and, protest against anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ legislation. And we also have families that, are still on a journey to acceptance, who are working towards really understanding their child's identity. Some families that are overcompensating and being overprotective and, thinking that that's the best for their child. And so we like to think that all families are on that journey and can eventually get to a place where they are really supportive of their child's experience, but we also know that we have to simultaneously create spaces where kids can have chosen family as well and can experience love and support and community, can celebrate their successes, can grieve their losses. So that's just sort of another way too, and we understand, especially for BIPOC youth, that sometimes they need that specific space because they might be coming from communities where they don't see a lot of representation or don't see people that look like them or have shared experiences as them. So, is there anything else you wanted to speak to GSAFE's work? Okay. So we also have what specific support is needed for LGBTQ BIPOC students in schools right now. And some unique challenges students are facing.
I think what they need administration and teachers that are supportive of them, right? I've said before that I think that like I think in school in general we weaponize for education, and how we do that is, again, when you're speaking to and learning the whole picture of a student and what's going on, we don't do that, right? If they're acting up in class, we automatically assume that they're a troublemaker, and then we kick them out, we suspend them, and then they get behind in their schoolwork, and then we expect them to catch up, and then that just keeps trickling down, right? But it's like it feels like there's not time being taken to figure out like there's more to the story than just that, and understanding that teachers are also underpaid, overexerted, all that, and there's a lot of things that they have to take care of. But I don't think that, like, especially with BIPOC, youth of color, and it's just like, we put them in this space, in this box that they've been in for 8 hours a day, and expect them to learn all these things while being teenagers, while being mistreated, bullied, having their pronouns acknowledged, and expect them that they want to sit there and learn, and that's just not how that happens. We need to take the time to get to know our students and also want to learn their pronouns, because it is part of, it's not going away. It's not deteriorating, it's not gonna simmer down, it's gonna keep getting bigger. But I think we also need educators that, like, I firmly believe that life is always a learning experience. So just because you're a teacher doesn't mean you stop learning. You have to learn with your students, because your students are teaching you something as well. So I think we need to take the time to actually want to learn these things and have it stick.
Yeah, I agree. I think students also need opportunities to just experience joy and existing. I think specifically for the populations that we serve, they're exhausted. Like, students are tired of having always to be in the position of fighting for their rights and educating other people. GSAFE recently hosted a middle school conference, so we brought students from 12 different middle schools across Wisconsin together, and I had the privilege of being sort of on the planning of a lot of what that day looked like. And last year we did a conference and the theme was impact. So we talked a lot about, how can kids make a positive impact, and how are they going to go back to their school communities and really fight for social justice. And this year we sort of shifted that theme, and the theme was inspire. And so the kids actually just got to come together for a day of, being with one another, celebrating what it means to be LGBTQ. We brought in drag performers who brought costumes and makeup and wigs for the kids to do their own drag performances. They had spaces where students were coming out for the very first time because they finally found folks who shared their same identities. Students were dancing, they did mindfulness and yoga, and I think just, I want to see schools incorporating that kind of thing with youth, and I want to see after school clubs creating spaces where kids can experience joy and to understand that they shouldn't always be in the position of needing to be the educators, needing to fight for their rights. Like, as beautiful as it is to see youth showing up to the Capitol and talking directly to Congress people, it's also sad. It's sad to see that they have to fight for their right to exist. So I think I just want to see more of those opportunities for kids to be kids, for kids to play, for kids to mess up and make mistakes, and just be able to exist.
I think what Katie is also saying, because what I'm hearing is that, like, students are spending more time being activists than actual students, which tells me that adults are failing kids left and right, because it's our job to protect students and pave the way and make sure they don't have to keep going to the Capitol. And of course, we have some students that love going to the Capitol. That's their whole thing. They are activists. They love it. But I mean, they're spending more time up there than they're actually, like, learning about history. That makes a difference. I think that when we also need to stop clumping students together. Whenever Katie and I have gone to, like, a conference or something to speak, and majority of the people that we're speaking to are white, they always talk about students as, like, one big picture, and that's just not the case. Because we could also talk about, like, when we went back to virtual learning, right? Like, a lot of the white students that I worked with had access to internet, had computers, had all these things. The students that are color, they may have been given a laptop from school, but had no access to internet. So it's then, what do you expect them to do? Right, you're giving them a point A but not a point B to get to point C. So it's not helpful, and we need to stop acting like access is, like, viable and easy for everyone, because it's not. Sometimes the access is simply, like, just getting your parent having a car to get you where you need to go, right? Being able to afford a book, right? And again, it's like we expect students to, like, want to be in school, and then we charge them so much money to go to college, but then they have to afford all this. It's just a system of failure.
No, I totally agree with that. There first needs to be, like, true acknowledgement that LGBTQ BIPOC students are experiencing racism and queerphobia, right? That we've seen, right? The ways that it's shown up is, I don't want to say little, but as something as common, like I feel like a lot of people are able to pinpoint when they're talking about, how are queer young people impacted, is like, it could be something as forgetting somebody's pronoun and not using their pronouns correctly and not using their names, to, like, saying racially charged things, right? Like, I want to say that because a lot of times when we talk about BIPOC students in the school district, we usually remove them and their queer identities, right? Or when we talk about queer students, we don't think about the BIPOC students. And that, again, it goes back to what I'm saying, is that they're experiencing multiple things at once, and we actually must actively look at those things, acknowledge it. And there actually needs to be a different type of investment from the school district, right? There needs to be investment, like a strategic investment in like the leadership development, their creativity, and the wellness, right? Wellness of LGBTQ students. There really actually needs to be, right? And it could be something as simple as, hey, we're gonna serve culturally specific food during lunch. Right? And I'm saying that because, dang, I would have loved to have gone to school and like seen some like Hmong food. Like that would have made me feel so good, instead of like having to go and sometimes packing my own lunch and then, you know, being on like, what, right? Or even like learning our history, right? And I really want to say, like, young people, they're in the schools. They should take ownership. They should have ownership of what they're learning, right? And again, what we're Tyrone and Katie has already shared, like, teachers are gotta always be learning, and everybody is a teacher and a learner, and we can learn so much from students, right? Young people, and that young. I really want to say this, emphasize this. Young LGBTQ students. I think a lot of times when we look at like, when a lot of times when they're looking at like what they can be in life, right? A lot of times we talk about like all the amazing organizers and activists, and I love them, but I also want to say, like, you can be, like, your life does not have to amount to that, right? Your life does not have to amount to you continuously having to fight like policies and continuously having to fight to live. Like, you get to be an artist and create things that have nothing to do with like the hate that you're given, right? And I really want to emphasize that, because I think it's so true. They don't get to be kids. They don't get to make mistakes. And we actually need to make room and space for that and hold that, instead of throwing it back at them and saying, hey, you messed up. How are you gonna, fix this? You can't come back to school.
Yeah, and to speak to one of your points about educators too, I think we often see really incredible educators who are very passionate about supporting LGBTQ youth and supporting all of their students. And like I said earlier, a lot of the educators here in Wisconsin are white folks. And so I think sometimes it takes a little bit of humility to be able to see that you might not always be able to be everything for your students. Like, you might not be able to be the safe space for your students, even though you really want to be. And that isn't because you're not a good educator. It isn't because you're not informed or educated enough. It's because you simply do not have the lived experience that a lot of your students have. And so I think that means taking a step back, looking for opportunities for uplifting folks of color, bringing folks of color into your space, finding, primary resources and testimonies and experiences of folks of color, and bringing that into your classroom, showing videos and documentaries and stories that are written by folks of color, sharing the experiences of folks of color, and that will make a world of difference. I think, we have schools that reach out to us sometimes and ask, like, our GSA is primarily white students, and we don't know what we're doing wrong. We don't know how to get the queer folks of color, students of color that are in our school to be a part of our GSA. And, sometimes that answer is so obvious. You have white GSA advisors and all white students in your GSA. You need to be intentionally creating spaces that are led by folks of color to make those spaces feel safe. And yeah, like I said, I think it's a matter of knowing that you can still be a good teacher who is supporting your students, but not being the one who is directly providing that support.
I think that kind of begs the question then, like, how do we get more educators of color? Then also, how do we keep them in our school system? And how do we encourage them to be GSA advisors and being part of that? Because, I mean, let's be real, and to use the term loosely, but like, administrations are bullies too. They bully colleagues left and right. If a teacher's standing up for students, LGBTQ identifying, BIPOC, trans, whatever, they do get bullied in their school, and they have no support. They're not protected. So it's also then, like, if you're not being protected in school, why would you want to do an after-school program where you're therefore not being protected? And most kids don't join GSAs, especially students of color, because it's a target, right? And they're already being targeted in schools anyways with their education, as I keep saying. And I think one of the things is that when we were talking about like education, we don't ask students what they want to learn. We present them with a curriculum that doesn't fit all students, right? Because for me personally, when I was in high school, I stopped going to history class because they taught me nothing different about the genocide of my people, rape, pillaging, how they stole land, all these things. I was like, so yeah, I'm not learning anything positive about my Black culture. And then we celebrate Black History Month with the same historical figures every year. Nothing is new. And I was like, so for you, it's a month. For me, it's every day, 24/7. So for me, I'm not doing this anymore. Until they found a teacher who, Mr. Tuck, I'll never forget, taught ethnic studies, and it opened my whole world to like a whole different part of life. But I mean, we don't have those in schools, so.
Yeah, I think, it's about creating affinity spaces for staff of color. It's creating listening sessions, like listening to your staff and figuring out what they need to feel supported. And then in turn, listening to your students. What are students asking for? And how are you even creating those spaces for students to be able to give like their honest feedback, feel safe enough to give their feedback? And then what are you doing to actually make it happen? Because you're not going to get any kind of, honest feedback or results, or you're not gonna get any honest feedback if students aren't actually seeing results from, what they're saying.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have this, I'll be really honest, I have a complex relationship with the school district. One, I think public education is beautiful. I do think there's so much more that we have to do to really turn it around for our young people. And I also know that there are just certain things set that it's going to make it very impossible for us to move to get the things we really need. And that is why at Freedom Inc., we provide like year-long weekly programs that's culturally specific to our folks, right? So that folks can really be in that space, see people who look like them, and learn the things that they want that's affecting their community, right? And not have to stop and say, hey, this is what I mean when I say this, right? This is how it looks like in my community. But that in that space, it's like, oh, you get what I'm saying? Okay, we both understand. So now how do we move from here, right? And on top of that, our summer programming, right? Our books and breakfast programming that's provided to elementary age young people. In the summer, that's very much modeled modeled from the Black Panthers breakfast program that provides like breakfast and also literacy skills for young people, right? And we're reading books that a lot of times in the schools they don't get to read about, right? Such as like, hey, we're gonna read and we're gonna talk about consent and body parts and how do we be safe and how do we protect each other. Or we're gonna talk about families, right? And how families can look very different, right, for everybody. And then we also have our youth organizing camp that's really geared towards our high school young people and really, again, learning and harnessing into like their rich history, right, of the Black and Southeast Asian history and the resiliency and how do we build on that, right? And really activating them, again, to really like think about the changes that they can do that's beyond the schools, right? That it doesn't have to come from formal education, but that our family and our elders have so much to provide us, right? And I'm really speaking on that as like Hmong people and how our history is not actually documented, written out, right? But that it's passed down orally. And how do we actually tap into that wisdom from our elders, right? And say, hey, there are different ways of learning and different ways of sharing. And storytelling is something so powerful. And how do we keep that alive in our young people?
So we have about 10 minutes left. We have folks who are here listening, folks who are probably streaming on social media or from their offices, and we get the opportunity to share like one piece of advice, something that we want everyone who's listening today to walk away knowing or thinking about. So what is the one thing that you would share to wrap up our time?
Do one of you, 'cause I guess, well, there's a lot because my mind's always racing, but I would say that listen to your youth because they're telling you, right? They're telling you who they are. They're telling you what they need. They're telling you about their future, and that you have to want to be a part of their journey, right? And that is acknowledging simply pronouns. right? And it's simply acknowledging who they are in a space. And I think that it's interesting that, like, I think that if a child's pronouns, because also these are children, let's just talk about that too. Like, these are adults telling children that they shouldn't exist, but it's interesting. Like, our job is to, like, help them grow and protect them and like all these things, but we sit there and tear them down, that they shouldn't have gender affirming care, that we shouldn't be using their pronouns, that they shouldn't exist in these spaces, that they can't use the bathroom. And it's wild that it bothers adults so much. And it's like, for me, what else are you doing with your time that you're so focused on these children, right? These anti-trans bills that we're trying to pass, that Wisconsin was trying to pass, were targeted towards 6 transgender students that we know that play in WIA sports. That's 6 students out of all the schools. Like, why is that necessary, right? And I think that if you have problems with children's pronouns and like transitioning and also being LGBT, you really need to stop and think about, like, why does that bother me so hard in the core of who I am? Like, what about triggers you to hate a student, and a black student at that, for existing? Because when Katie and I talk about, like, well, when we talk about going out to do like presentations and stuff, we have different exposure than our white staff, right? Because we're already people of color. People already hate us the moment they see our skin color walking through the door, and then they find out that we're LGBTQ identified, and then they hate us again, right? So that's different for my white colleagues who don't have to deal with that. So we talk about expectation and exposure, but I think that, again, my message is, like, if it really bothers you that much, you probably should, like, do some self-reflection and figure out why, because it stems from, like, self-hatred or just not wanting to understand that, like, things are different. Not everything is a heteronormative straight path, and it never has been. So.
Also, we just got the note that, psst, it's a power hour. It's 12 o'clock. So, yeah, I think if I could give a piece of advice, I would say, if you find yourself always resorting to the default that people are cisgendered or people are heterosexual, or you are centering your own white experience, to do a factory reset on that, to challenge yourself to step into a different perspective, to understand and acknowledge and not make assumptions about people's identity, people's story. What they look like does not tell you anything. A piece of what you know about them doesn't tell you everything. And just notice when you're doing that in your interactions. Start today and see where you're at by next week, Tuesday. How many times did you make an assumption about someone's gender identity, someone's sexuality, someone's race, or someone's ethnicity or background or story? And start to keep track of that and check yourself, because that in itself is going to help present you as an ally. If you're someone who can acknowledge what kinds of assumptions you're making and check that in the moment and say, oh, I'm sorry, I think I made an assumption about your gender. Could you share your pronouns with me? Or, oh, is there a piece of that, part of your identity or a piece of your story that you would like to share? And creating those kinds of spaces for people to really open up and tell you those things and not always be looking to be educated by other people. I think that's going to get you far in building relationships and growing as an ally.
Yeah, I echo everything you two have said already. The one thing that I just really want to emphasize is all of those actions, and we need resources, right? Young LGBTQ BIPOC folks need resources. And so, hey, it's Big Share, we're fundraising. So put your money where your mouth is, right? If you're saying, like, I believe in supporting BIPOC LGBTQ young people, put in that $5, right? Every dollar counts. Right? We're really talking about the investments of, like, their leadership, their wellness, and their creativity, right? That they get to live, they get to grow into adulthood, they get to become elders, right? That's what we want. We want to actually sustain their life, right? That they can imagine it, that they can live full, fulfilling lives. And right now, just with the amount of anti-trans bills that are being introduced, right? We know that, yes, as we're actively fighting that, we actually need the help of the community, and that people power is the most powerful. And imagine what happens when we actually put in all of our resources together to actually do those things. So let's do that, right? Donate to GSAFE, donate to Freedom Inc. so that we can continue doing the amazing work that we do and expand and deepen our work. because yes, I'm pretty sure the three of us, we will do this work regardless, but that like some things require funding, right? And actually like seeing community and like invest in our work drives us and also our young people to say, hey, there are people beyond like us here that believe in you.
And tell one person. If you haven't heard of GSAFE or Freedom Inc. and you walk out of here today, tell one person, because that makes a huge difference of, hey, I heard about this organization. Did you know they were doing that thing? And then that person tells someone in their book club who happens to have a queer child who needs some resources, and then suddenly they found themselves working for GSAFE or coming to one of our events or supporting our mission or volunteering with us or, you know, doing the same thing with Freedom Inc. So if you can donate, great, thank you, donate. And if you already have, spread the word, tell people about our organizations. Did you want to add a last thing?
Yeah, I guess I feel like if you can get down with the gays at Pride, you can donate to the organizations that exist, and you can't act like we don't exist because you're exploiting the gays, and even though you're like paying for things, you're still taking all of our joy for your own. So, you know, donate.
It's so true. It's so true.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for having us.